You're listening to the How to Talk to Girls podcast with your dating coach, Trip, from tripadvice.com. Do you struggle with getting girls to like you? Well, you're going to learn step-by-step how to talk to girls to create deep connections and meet the woman of your dreams. Here's your host, me, Trip. Hello and welcome to the How to Talk to Girls podcast. This is your host, Trip Kramer from tripadvice.com, and I got a great episode for you today. Now, you've seen the title, you know what this is about. We're talking about how to meet girls in your very small town. I get this question a lot. In fact, I'm surprised it's taken me almost 200 episodes to get to this question, but I know a lot of you who have listened to the podcast and are listeners of the podcast live all around the world, and so you've asked this question because you live in a town that's very small, and you might not live in major cities. You know, ones I can say right now off the top of my head in the United States are things like New York, Miami, Chicago, Los Angeles, Dallas, Las Vegas. Maybe you don't live in one of those big cities or anywhere else around the world, because this podcast gets listeners from almost 180 different countries, which is pretty crazy. So you might live in a small town, so what are you supposed to do? That's what this episode is about. Going to give you some harsh realities, some truths, some techniques, some great stuff that you can work on to help you out in this area. So before we get into that, I just want to announce that I am doing a webinar for my program called Hooked. That's right. I'm doing a free webinar, and that is going to be available for you to sign up. I'm going to put a link in the episode description. I know you might be listening to this years later, months later, where it's not available. Well, either way, if you want to still learn about Hooked, just go to getherhooked.com and you'll learn about my program there. But I'm doing a free webinar that's talking about the program, but mainly giving you some great tips. So I want you to check out the webinar link that, again, I'll be putting in the episode description. Go there, and I will be giving you a free training and then telling you more about how you can get your hands on Hooked. You don't want to miss it, because I'm going over the 3 psychological principles that get a woman hooked on you. So yes, you are going to learn something. Yes, you are going to have some steps and practical techniques and information to take away from the webinar. And of course, available to you through that webinar will be my program Hooked, which I'll talk about there. Again, repeating myself, if you're listening to this and this is weeks later, then just go to getherhooked.com. But if not, I'm doing this webinar on Wednesday, November 1st. There's 2 different time slots for you to pick from. There's an 11 a.m. PST and a 6 p.m. PST. So go to the link, check it out, join me next Wednesday. Now let's get into the episode. Today we're talking about what it means to meet girls in your small town. I get this question all the time, Trip. I'd love to go and meet girls, but I can't because I know everyone in my town, or you don't know everyone in your town, but it's such a small town. There's not enough people. Or maybe you're in school, and your school is like your little town, right? You're only going to be talking to girls in your school, whether you go to college or you're in high school and you're listening to this. And so there's only so many people to choose from. So what do you do? What do you do when you only have a limited number of people? Well, okay, I'm going to start off with a few bits of truth for you, okay? Here's a harsh reality, and I'm sorry to start it off in this tone, but I am your coach, right? I am here to help you and give you the right information. So let's talk about this. The harsh reality is that if you live in a small town and there's no one to talk to, then you have to make moves to go to another town, okay? I'll give you the good news in a second. But that's what I'm saying here, is that if there's not enough girls in your town to talk to, and you're like, well, Trip, I don't know. I know all 300 people in my town. What do I do? Well, I can't magically make women appear. No one can do that. So what are you supposed to do? I mean, you can easily just give up. That's something you can do. You can say, well, what am I going to do? I live in a small town and I can't leave. Well, you can leave. And if you can't leave, well, then you got to be working on a way to be able to leave. You know, you might be like, well, Trip, love to go to a next town, but I don't have a car. So it's all these lines of excuses that I hear, and that's okay. I know you're not trying to make excuses. You're trying to give me the reality, but I'm trying to give you the reality of what you can do. So if you live in a small town, then you need to find out a neighboring town or the neighboring big city and you need to make an excursion to go there and to meet more girls. But Trip, it's so far. I don't know what to tell you. Then you get in your car and you drive far, or you sit there in your town and do nothing. The reality is, if you want to get better at meeting girls, what you have to do is you have to be able to practice socializing and talking to girls. That is what you need to do to be able to do this. Otherwise, you're going to be talking to one girl every couple of weeks. You're not going to build the skill. You're not going to get better. And it's not going to work out for you. So you need to be able to talk to more girls. So you need to think about what can you do to get yourself in front of more girls? How can you get to your neighboring town? And you might be thinking, well, Trip, you want me to drive an hour? I'll tell you a little story. When I was about 24, 25, and at this time of the podcast, I'm 32, so this is maybe like 7, 8 years ago, I lived far. I lived in a small town. Okay, so I experienced this. I live in a small town. I live in a town outside of Los Angeles. It was a small suburb. And while it wasn't too small, well, there wasn't really many places to go. Okay, there wasn't many places that I could go to be able to meet women. So I had to drive 1 hour every single night. Yes, that's right. I had to drive an hour, and I just made it happen. And by the way, I wasn't kidding. I did this every single night. Every night I'd go and drive an hour. I would drive an hour from work to home because I lived kind of far from work. And then I would drive another hour from home after I showered to go out and practice meeting girls. That's how I got better. That is the reality, and I had to do that. No, I didn't do that for that long. I did it for only 3 months, but hey, I had to do what I had to do. I wanted to get the results, so I needed to figure out ways to do it. It's fairly simple. It's like, well, if you can't meet girls here, meet girls somewhere else, get in your car and do it. It's simple in theory, but I know emotionally you're probably like, well, that's so hard and it's a lot of work and I wake up early for it. Listen, we can make excuses all day. We really can. We can make excuses all day. But I promise you there is a solution. There is a way to figure out how to get to the point where you're putting yourself in front of more girls. Now, for that case out there where you're like, but Trip, no, seriously, I live in a rural farm town and the closest town that has anybody is like 3 to 4 hours away. Well, for you in your extreme case, you're like the 1% where you're like, there's honest to God no girls anywhere in like a radius of where I live that is feasible to be driving to every night because, listen, I'm not going to drive 3 to 4 hours a night. And I get that. No, I think that's ridiculous too. You're not going to drive 3 to 4 hours every night. Maybe once a month though. You never know. Just to practice once a week. I would still drive 3 to 4 hours. I know that sounds extreme, but hey, carve out the time and do it. But I get it. You're not going to do that every day. So you got to move. Now we're going, if you have an extreme case, then I need to give you an extreme solution. You have to move. You do. You have to move somewhere. You have to go somewhere where there are people in your town to talk to, okay? That's what you have to do. And if you're thinking, well, Trip, I don't have the money to move, right? More excuses just kind of like flowing in, a lot of things you could say to try to get yourself to not be able to put yourself in front of women. Well, then it's not women right now that you have to worry about. What you need to worry about is how you can make the money to get to the point where you are able to move or able to buy a car or able to get the transportation to get to where you need to go. It's really problem solving. So if it's a money issue, then your first problem isn't how do I attract more girls? It's how do I make more money? What can I do to make more money? Can you get creative? Is there anything you can do to get creative to be able to make more money, to put yourself in a better position to be able to date more? What can you do? So that's what I'm asking you to do, is to eliminate excuses, get creative, and see where you can figure out how you can get yourself in front of more girls. So my job on this episode is really to get you thinking on a different level here, because it's very easy to think, okay, Trip says I need to talk to girls, but there's no girls. And then you're kind of like done at this point. Well, I'm teaching you to think outside the box and think a little bit harder and to eliminate any excuse possible to get to the point where you need to be in front of more girls and talking to more girls. Here's the good news. I got some good news for you. The good news is that you still have opportunities to build this skill, okay? This skill doesn't have to be just built by talking to girls. The skill I'm talking about, by the way, is attraction, of building attraction, learning how to attract women, which I talk about in my program called Hooked at GetHerHooked.com, or I talk about over on my podcast. But what I'm trying to say here is that you can be able to build this still with the women in your town. So I really challenge you to think, have you really gone out of your way? Some guys are like, well, there's not a lot of girls walking around and they don't talk to anybody. But really, I challenge you. There's really not a downtown area where you can go and try to do some approaches and talk to girls. Really, you've utilized the apps and online dating and you've completely run out. I mean, I want you to milk the town for everything that it's worth until you get to the point where you're like, okay, I need to drive an hour. I need to drive 3 to 4 hours. I need to move. I need to make more money, right? Those are all more extreme examples. So ask yourself, can you really actually be at the point where you're giving up right now and saying, town's too small, I'm out? I don't think so. I think that there's probably more girls to talk to than you really think, and you might not be thinking outside the box in terms of where you can go to meet these girls in your town using the local paper, meetup.com, the common areas in your town where people populate, wherever those are. I mean, let's see, where I was living, and I was in a small town, it was like a suburb, there was a few bars, so I utilized those. I'd go to the bars, there was like 2 to 3 bars I'd go to. I knew that people populated there. There was a couple of malls, I would go there. And then when I tapped that out, or when I was like, all right, time to move on, then I would drive my hour to somewhere that had more women to talk to. But really, have you utilized every single possibility of all the places in your town that you can be talking to girls? Question yourself. Ask yourself that. See if you can get even more creative. Okay, and I'm giving you ideas as we're talking about this. Also, okay, how else can you build this skill? I was kind of going into that and I kind of veered off, I believe. How else can you build this skill? Well, okay, you can still talk to strangers. So even if you're like, Trip, I really tapped out. Like I really tapped out the 1,000 people that live in my town, if it's that small, and I can't really talk to any more girls. Like I know everyone. Like it's done. Like it's not going to happen. Well, where are places that anyone hangs out, even guys? I'm not saying to hit on guys. I'm not saying to build attraction with men. I know you want women, but what I'm saying is you can still practice the conversational skills that allow you to be better at communicating with women when you finally do get the chance to be in front of a woman. So can you talk to a cash register person? Can you talk to someone working at a store, someone who you don't know? Who can you talk to that's a stranger just to practice conversation skills? Right? There are people in your town, I'm sure, there's all varying levels of small towns, I mean, anywhere from 1,000 at the most extreme, all the way to maybe like 50,000. Okay, so I'm sure there's places where you can go and talk to people who just aren't girls or aren't women that you even want to be attracting, just because it's purely about building conversational skills, relational skills, being able to communicate with a stranger, getting over the fear of talking to someone, right? Stepping into this unknown, which is a way to be able to build confidence, right? And I always talk about this in terms of confidence. Confidence is a verb. It's something you do. It's not something you have. So you build confidence by doing confidence. And that means that you become competent in an area where you're not good at. So in order to be confident, you need to do confidence. In order to be confident with women, you need to do confidence. In order to do confidence, you need to repeat over and over the thing that you need to be doing, which again is always coming back to the idea of talking to more girls. Talking to more girls, and then you can get used to the idea of talking to strangers, or even like I said a second ago, talking to strangers, talking to anyone you can, so you can get to the point where you're able to successfully attract them. Because everything that I'm teaching you in my program called Hook, again at getherhook.com, everything I'm teaching you on my YouTube channel, on my podcast, on my newsletter, everything there are the techniques and things you can use. But it's not going to do much for you if you can't use it anywhere, on someone, somewhere, anywhere. So that's why I urge you to take a more extreme stance, because you're in an extreme position, right? Most people are not in small towns, so you're an extreme case. And for extreme cases, we need to take extreme measures. Those extreme measures, like I said, come in the form of talking to more people that you don't know, even if they're not women, driving, making a schedule for yourself, a couple times a week, driving an hour, making it happen, going out there, and then for that 0.0001% where you're like the guy who's like, Trip, I'm screwed. I can't make any money. I'm so broke. There's no job opportunities. I live on a farm somewhere. Everything is 3 to 4 hours away, and I'm stuck. Well, all I can tell you is you're not stuck, first of all. You just have to take more extreme measures. It may take completely rehauling your life and rehauling everything that's going on to get to a place where you want to be. It may take scrapping every dime you have and moving to a city and staying with a friend if you have one, or starting a business somewhere where you can start making more money, or saving to a degree that's insane where you're not spending barely any money and saving so much where you can get to the point where you can get to a new place, right? So you got to think extreme measures, and that's what it's going to take. If you're listening to this and you live in a big town but you're curious to what I said, hopefully this makes you feel grateful for the opportunity that you have in front of you. You know, that you have the opportunity to talk to many girls who are just walking around everywhere. And there's guys out there who are not as lucky because they live in a small town. There's a guy who is a listener of my Facebook Lives that I do every Tuesday. And he lives in the Netherlands, and he lives in a small town. And you know what he does? He bikes. He takes his bicycle and he bikes to the nearest town. So that's what he's doing. And that's pretty extreme. That sounds very annoying and very cold probably when it's in the winter months. So you got to be thinking like him. What can you do? And if you're like, well, I'm too lazy, well, life doesn't reward the lazy. And that's the harsh truth. That's one of the biggest harsh truths of this episode. Life does not reward the lazy. Life doesn't owe you anything. No one is owed. You have to create your own results. You have to create everything for yourself. And it's going to be sometimes really easy, and sometimes it's going to be hard, and some things will be easier than others. And other times it's going to be harder than others. And that's the way life works. And the world goes round and round. So yeah, that is my advice to you on this episode of the How to Talk to Girls podcast. Don't forget to join me on my webinar on November 1st. A link is in the episode description. I'll make sure that's in there so you can copy, paste, or click on that and be able to join me on the webinar where I talk about the three psychological principles that get women hooked on you. And right now, if this is after November 1st, which for many of you it will be, that's okay. Go to getherhooked.com. There's a video you can watch there. I still go over the three psychological principles. It's all in there, so it's a win-win for everyone, and learn how to get women hooked. And for you who lives in a small town, I wish you luck. It's all about perseverance, thinking outside the box, pushing yourself, eliminating excuses, and doing what you need to do to live the life that you want and get the result that you want. In this case, it's finding an amazing girl. So you can do that. Good luck to you, and I hope that you put the effort and energy into it if you truly want it.